Our first speaker is from the US. It's another speaker from the US today. It's a long journey for these guys. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Mr. Michael Youngblood.
Thanks, Paul. It was a long journey. Parts of my presentation, I'll admit, are a bit US-centric, and some of my data is there, but I'll come around to points and show how a lot of my presentation applies globally. So we are two founders of two organizations who are friendly competitors, I would say, in this new space that you may know as sort of this digital nomad space, the slow travel. And my favorite thing about being a founder, it's not that I don't have my own boss, which is a lot of fun. It's not that I can wear whatever I want, which is also a lot of fun. It's that a startup is a vessel. It's a learning vessel. The primary goal of a startup is to learn as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And I think that's what we're sharing today, what we have learned as two startups in this new space of slow travel, of long travel. And we want to share that with you. And I think it's worth just looking for a minute at the startup space and travel. In the last 10 years, there's been $60 billion invested in travel startups, $60 billion. I'm a very, very, very small slice of that at Unsettled. And the vast majority of that has actually come in the last 3 years. So out of that $60 billion, the vast majority of that investment in travel startups has been in the past 3 years. More than half over the last 10 years has come in 3 years. And that's a significant amount of learning, of capital too, but a lot of learning that's out there. And I would encourage anybody who works in the travel space, the next time you meet a founder, ask her not what she does, ask her what she has learned on her journey. Startups work on the fringe of the economy. They work to test new models, new markets. They take greater risk than a typical corporation that's been around for years. And that's where this learning comes from. And so I want to take a look at some of the trends that are driving this slow travel, this long travel, some of the macro and microeconomic trends that are driving this. And I want to start with maybe the largest of all. It's a shift in how we are fundamentally living today. The old model, the model of yesterday, was you'd go to school for about 20 years, you would enter into the workforce, you'd be a productive member of society, 20 to 30, 40 years. If you were lucky enough, you would retire and travel for much of your healthy retirement years. In the US, there are 10,000 people who wake up every morning, who look in the mirror on their first day of retirement, and they ask themselves, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? There's a new model, which you can probably guess by now. Yes, you start with about 20 years in school, maybe 26, 28 years for some millennials today who drag school on. Then you enter into the workforce and travel. There's not a separation as there used to be. Sure, you're taking vacations just as we were in the past, the week, the 2 weeks, but today you're fundamentally able and willing to travel at the same time as you're working. And I want to spend the next few minutes breaking this concept down to show how large we think it is and the opportunity that we've been taking advantage of as two startups. This statement is essentially what I want to spend the next few minutes on. The devolving nature of work is changing how we travel, and it is increasing our need for community. So I'm just going to go through this one by one and start with the big one. In the next 10 years, 50%, my data is from the US and Europe, 50% of the US and European economies of the workforce will be freelance workers. What does that have to do with travel? Let's break that down a little bit. Let's look at it this way. In 2027, there's going to be a fundamental shift in our economy. And the ways that we have a contract as an individual in the workforce, my contract with that workforce. By 2027, the amount of freelancers in the economy is going to overtake the non-freelancers. To break that down and to give an example of how massive this shift is, I just maybe want to survey the audience. Raise your hand if there's anybody in the room who has met your spouse at a workplace. Has anybody met a spouse? Two, three, four people. Has anybody had a romantic fling at a workplace? Paul, keep your hand down. Any romantic flings in the workplace? Come on, I know there's some. All right, there's a few brave people. Has anybody met a good friend, a great friend, a best friend at a workplace? Just about everybody in the room. What happens in 10 years when the majority of people are no longer going into that workplace? When they're working from home, when they're working for themselves? What does that look like? I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like an increasing need for community. Think about the institutions that typically provide community in the world, especially in the West. It begins with school, as I stated. You meet a lot of great friends there. In social activities and sports and pastimes and religion and family and extended family. This is traditionally where we meet community, where you meet people who come into your life and mean a lot. All those institutions, in one way or the other, have been eroding, especially in the West, for the last 20, 30, 40 years. And now the last frontier, work, where we've been meeting people, where we've fallen in love, where we've made best friends, where we're learning throughout our lifetimes, that is fundamentally devolving. So what does this have to do with travel? If the bad news is that our relation, it's not necessarily bad news, that our relationship to the workplace is devolving, it's changing. Many of these freelancers work from home. Many of them have multiple contracts they're working at the same time. What is the bright side of that? And for travel, I really think it's this. Fundamentally, what we do in travel is we bring people together along the journeys that we share, that we host, places we take them to. We bridge cultures, and I think this work is so much more important today than any time in history. Last week, I was in Miami speaking in the conference called The Future of Travel, and as I sat in the audience, the future of travel it was a lot of investors in the room. We continually talked about trends such as virtual reality in travel and how that's going to impact and disrupt parts of the travel industry. And I couldn't help but sit there and to think to myself, we work all day in front of these machines, in front of these computers and laptops and these phones. And now this sector that we all love is going to be disrupted by the same technology. Where instead of going to visit Bangkok, go to visit your favorite island here or there, you're never going to have to leave your room to get that reality. That's not why we're here. That's not what we're about. And the good news here is that 40%, a recent survey, 40% of American workers said that they were considering to travel while working, travel abroad for personal time while they're working. That wasn't a reality 20 years ago. And so with these massive shifts in how people are working, how they're working from home, how they're working for themselves, how they're contracting out, what are the solutions that I think my company is leading, that Remote Life is leading? For us, just to give you a glimpse, and we may spend some more time talking about this, what we're doing at Unsettled, and I think it's very similar for Remote Life, there's a foundation here to what we do. There are three parts to it. We provide a workspace. We have about 10 locations around the world, from Bali to Morocco. You show up and you have a workspace when you arrive at Unsettled. The second thing we provide is global housing. You show up and you have something that feels like a home. There's a couch for you and your new friends to kick your feet off and hang out. It doesn't feel like a polished hotel. It feels like home. It's informal. It's relaxed. And the third thing is there's a local team at Unsettled from the host destination that allows you to live like a local. It allows you to understand where are the local restaurants that I'd like to visit. How do I get there? How might I hire that motorbike in Bangkok if you're willing to do that? And so this is the base layer, but this actually isn't what we do. This isn't what we're in the business of. What we're in the business of doing is immersive, shared experiences. At Unsettled, you show up on the first day of the month with 25 other people from around the world in one of these destinations. Yes, you get your workspace. Yes, you get your housing. Yes, you get that local team. But you show up on that first day with 25 people, and you spend the next 30 days with them. You share all parts of your life. You're working together, but you're also sharing the challenges that you're going through at work. You're sharing new ideas for maybe a new project or a startup. You're fundamentally living differently. And so there's a few things that we've learned. Unsettled has been around for about 18 months. And I just want to share a few of these things. So first, this is fundamentally happening around the world. We've had more people join Unsettled from Beirut than from New York City, more people from Cape Town than from San Francisco. We've had people from 65 countries, more people from Nairobi have joined Unsettled than from Chicago. The age range is, yes, vast, 24 to 72 years old. We've had grandparents join us. We've had retirees join us. The average age, at least for Unsettled, is about 35 years old. You heard in the keynote this morning, female travelers, especially solo female travelers, are really spending money in adventure tourism. 70% of Unsettled clients have been female. I'm blown away by that every single day, 70%. And we pull from these creative industries, the creative economy, if you will. Your designers, your illustrators, your programmers, the founders of companies. These are the people who are going through us. Average income is about $80,000 US for us. So if you want to take away, this is what we plug into our Facebook ads and our Google ads every single day. This is the data that we use to find out how do we attract this demographic. So you have 50% of a takeaway right there, the demographics. I fundamentally believe, from being part of this trend, this wave, over the last 5 years, that we're sitting on the verge of something that's so massive, and yet very few people really know how to interact with it. I look at this space, and I see what the cruise industry looked like in 1965, when the founder of Carnival Cruise just had the concept in mind to build this company with these massive ships that would go from one port to the next port. Except today, there is no one leader in this space. All the individuals who are out there moving around the world are creating their own ports of calls. They're moving from Ubud, Bali, to Chiang Mai, Thailand, to Medellin, Colombia. They're defining this for themselves. And the cities around the world, it's the cities that are now competing for this new market of traveler. And I think we'll get into this and how might you as host destinations, as tour operators, engage and attract this new type of traveler in the panel. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So, as I said, our next speaker, I think from his bio, did you complete the hike to Mount Everest Base Camp?
Yeah.
So, talking about adventure travel. Ladies and gentlemen, big round of applause for Mr. Nishal Duwal.
Thank you. So I did go to Nepal. I did complete the hike to Mount Everest Base Camp. And that was one of those exposures that I had to adventure travel, among other things. And for those of you who paid complete attention to what Michael said, you already understand the space that we're working in. You understand the innovative concept that we're working on, the model that we're following. And that's precisely what the Remote Life does as well. As an innovative company working towards building an atmosphere in the digital nomad ecosystem and to bring together people towards a more longer form of travel, you now understand the kind of model that we are following. So instead of focusing on that, and just a quick background on this, me and Michael, we got chatting last night, and we discussed the challenges that both our companies face. We discussed how our journeys have been over the years, and for the purpose of this 15-minute time slot here, I'd rather focus on a couple of historical trends and challenges, because instead of talking about what's happening right now, for me, a really interesting aspect is to discuss patterns, and to discuss people, two of my most favorite subjects. And we'll analyze these patterns from the perspective of changes that have already happened. We'll discuss how change is a constant. Change is probably one of the only constants, and you will always encounter it, you will always find it, and it will continue happening. It scares some of us, people who have experienced change in a negative format. So a company like Kodak, which was the pioneer of the photography industry, they couldn't anticipate the change that was about to come. And change like this can disrupt entire industries. The change that took them by surprise, the digital photography industry, but while change is good for some, it can be really harsh on others as well. And that's why we are here today. We are here to look at trends that help us anticipate this change so that we know what's going to come and we know how to be better prepared for it. Now, this is a very famous picture. It's a road from Abu Dhabi to Dubai, taken in 1975. And this is where we are today. And that gives me hope. It gives me hope that change can be for the better, that if we anticipate and we plan for proper change, we can build a better future for ourselves. So let's start with the trends of the travel revolution. Before I start with what is happening today, I would like to indulge you in a brief history lesson. And I want to see the kind of revolutions that have happened over the ages, the big impacts that have been created, and see if we can pick up anything from there. So for that, let me just start with what travel was like centuries ago. At the very beginning, this was travel. It was essentially a mission to find new lands, a mission to find new resources, a mission to find maybe even God. And that was a time when there was no tourism industry as such. What we knew about travel was that it was done because it had to be done and there was no other choice. But then in the 1850s, two important developments happened. The railroads were invented, and this good English gentleman, Thomas Cook, came out with the concept of package tourism. That right there is the birth of the tourism industry, railroads and package tourism combined. And these two things, they give us the 1850s revolution where tourism started as a proper industry. Fast forward 100 years to the 1960s, we got the commercial jets. And at that time, with the economic boom that we saw post the war and the baby boomers, all of these things, they gave us the modern version of what we believe to be the tourism industry. The rising incomes, the jet A's, international tourism, they gave birth to the big fat family vacation. A huge part of it still exists today. Families would take an annual trip. They will be planned by a travel agent, filled with sightseeing activities, and their destinations would be one of the, usually the top 10 places to go. This is the travel and tourism industry that we have known for the past 50-odd years. And this is what my parents used to do, and this is what has been happening for a long time now. But in the last 40 years only, in the last decade, so to speak, in the last 15 years, we got internet and we got mobile. And because of that, we've got everything that's now online. You can look at maps, you can look at pictures, you have reviews, you've got ratings, you can book everything from hotels and flights, and you can price compare online. Everything is online. And that just changed the entire travel landscape. It changed in a multiple different variations. It also brought with us new opportunities, and a part of that is the sharing economy. The sharing economy is what initially scared a lot of people, but if we analyze it in depth, so the sharing economy is the Airbnbs, the Ubers of the world, and if we look closely, we'll see that the sharing economy is less of a technological change and more of a mindset or a change of a preference. The early adopters of Airbnb, they did not do it because it was a new, shiny tool, but they adopted the sharing economy concept because it was a different experience. It was how they thought, and they thought differently, and that's what millennials usually do. So after we got the sharing economy and after we got the internet, a lot of different changes started happening. And these changes were not technology or tools driven, as we have observed in the past 3 revolutions. These are changes that are about how we think. These are changes of our preferences, of our expectations, and those are the trends that we can start analyzing today. Those are the trends, the social, the anthropological, and the way we think and feel. These are the trends that I observe. These are the trends that led me, Michael, and a bunch of other companies to do what we are doing right now. The number one trend that we observed was the need of experience. what is experience? And the problem with experience is it differs vastly. Travel is not just vacation. It's not just what people have been used to doing for a long time. It's all about experience now. Now, the term experience has been used, it has been overused, and to some extent has been abused over the past couple of years. And that's largely because experience is different for everyone, and that's what makes it challenging. Now, the pattern here is that with social media, with internet, we've got access to everything. We have looked at pictures of a destination, we have seen 3D maps, we have seen walkthroughs, we have seen blogs, vlogs, and videos, and everything. So we have technically seen the place that we are going to, and we know everything about it. So what's next? How do we really get to experience what's out there for us? And that's a part of different things that we observed and we took care of at the Remote Life. So experience for a big part of population today is basically 5 different things. It's about offbeat destinations. Destinations which are unexplored, which are unconventional, which are not the top 10 to-do lists on everyone's travel guide. It's also about soft adventure, adventure for the beginner, soft adventure for the adventure curious, someone who's just getting started with hiking, with cycling, scuba diving and skydiving, and jungle safari, desert safari, those kind of soft adventures, they form a part of this experience. It's also about niche interest-based groups. What are these groups like? So a group of only cycling enthusiasts, a group of only people who like to walk. These are specialized products that a lot of local and global corporations are coming out with. These are niche interest-based groups to get together a bunch of people who want to experience something, and that's essentially not a vacation, that's not travel, but it's more like an experiential activity that you're doing, and it bundles the whole concept of soft adventure with it. It's also about fitness to a huge extent. So for a lot of millennials, fitness forms a big part of their lifestyle, and for them, travel is not a way to compromise on fitness. It's not a lazy vacation that you're on. The experience has to include the fitness aspect of it as well. And one of the most key insights here is that if we look at what initially travel was like, travel was a mission, and that's what it is becoming today again. For people who want to experience travel, it's almost like they're traveling with a purpose in mind. They can have a purpose towards self-fulfillment, towards fulfilling their personal goals, pursuing hobbies, and for a lot of these people, it's also about finding themselves. So having a purpose in mind is how people are traveling today. They're not just traveling for a vacation, they're not traveling towards an end goal, they have a mission in mind, the way people used to have in the earlier ages. It's like an explorer's mission today. And that's what experience is for us at the Remote Life. The second major trend that's building up here, and that's something that Michael talked about at length as well, is the concept of remote work. Now, there's a huge population out there, a population of freelancers, digital nomads, and people who are working with bigger organizations working remotely, and they're now building their lifestyle around travel. These are people who don't have to be in the office. These are people who can work anywhere because they have internet, they have Wi-Fi, they have a laptop and a mobile device. If they're able to work remotely, they can get to choose where, when, and how they work. But what happens is that their expectations out of their travel lifestyle are very different. For them, travel is almost like the way they're living their life earlier. It's not a luxury, it's not something new. Instead of an annual holiday mega affair, it's now either a bunch of short, impromptu, frequent trips, or it's a much more elaborate form of long travel, a more permanent form of travel that we're observing today. And like Paul mentioned, so Thailand is one of the hotbeds for digital nomads. So a lot of these people, they will go to Thailand, they will go to a lot of other locations like Bali, South America, which are hotbeds for remote working populations. And they will settle there for a period of 3, 6, even 12 months. That's the long form of travel we are observing when it comes to the trend of remote work. Their needs are very different. For starters, they definitely need very reliable, high-speed internet, Wi-Fi, electricity, Skype, and meeting rooms as well. They have their own 9-to-5 work timings. They're working at the same time, so they're not on a vacation. They take out time from their schedule towards the evening or towards the weekend to gel with the local community, to experience the local culture. They rent their own apartments. They cook their own food. They participate in local community activities, and they try to be a part of wherever they are. And that's the remote working culture that we're talking about. It's so big to the extent that there are multiple conferences like these being organized to evaluate how and when remote workers are traveling and what kind of a trend are we seeing here, how big is it really. To the extent that if some of you have heard of companies like WordPress, these are companies which have nearly 600 employees, and they've got 0 offices. 600 employees across the world, they're all working from wherever they want. They've got no office to go to. This is a big, different population that we have to be targeting for future. So after experience and after remote work, the third major trend is community. And that's because the planet is not so lonely anymore. We definitely need that connection. And these kind of real connections, they matter to us a lot at this point. Community is all about meeting like-minded individuals. It's about being in an inclusive, in a sustainable, and a community-driven environment. And like Noiri mentioned in the keynote as well, a lot of women, they start off as solo travelers, but they end up joining the groups. And that's the kind of trend that we're noticing when it comes to community. People take off on their own because for a variety of reasons, they can't form those family or friend circle groups that they want to travel with. They take off as solo travelers, and along the way, they find the right set of people to travel and work and enjoy with. And that's the long form of travel that we're looking at. Now, for these people, authenticity is very important. It's very important for us to be transparent with them, to be honest with them, to the extent that for us, in our example, on the Remote Life's website, our pricing is completely transparent. You can actually look at the breakdown of where the cost goes. How much are we incurring in terms of salaries, marketing, logistics, and what is our profit margin? That's the kind of transparency that we are following at the Remote Life. And we believe that it's important for us to build that kind of a community, and that can only happen if we are authentic, if we are real, if we can connect to them on a very transparent level. So that's the insights that we have drawn from these 3 trends that we look at: the trend of experience, the trend of remote work, and the trend of looking for a community to be a part of. And that's what essentially the Remote Life is all about. So if you look at these 3 things combined, then that's what led us to this thing. And when we saw these trends, we saw a clear opportunity, an opportunity to bring people together, an opportunity to help them travel with a community, travel with a purpose, travel towards fulfillment, and adopt travel as a lifestyle instead of just luxury. And that's what the Remote Life is all about. Thank you.